attention. Today is August 28th. Could everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. McLean, could you please call the rolls?
Buckler.
Yes, here.
Murad.
Present.
Patterson.
Here.
Richardson.
Here.
Shadle.
Here.
Trotto.
Here.
And Kaplansky.
Here.
Commissioners Kempner and Smith are going to be late. I believe Commissioner Kempner should be arriving shortly. Commissioner Smith had a planning commission in another community.
Okay. All right, next item is approval of the agenda. Any motions to approve?
Go ahead. You made a noise first.
Go ahead.
I'll move for approving the agenda.
I support.
Okay, a motion and a second. All in favor?
Oh,
Do you want to do
Madam
a
Chair,
roll
we
call?
have to do the roll call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Could we move to a voice vote on that?
We could,
Could
yeah.
we look into doing that?
Absolutely.
Okay. You can do the roll call for now.
Okay. Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Trotto.
Yes.
Buckler.
Yes.
And Kaplansky.
Yes. Next is the approval of the minutes from the July 24th meeting.
So moved.
Supported.
Mr. McLean?
Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Trotto.
Yes.
Buckler.
Yes.
Kempner.
Yes.
And Kaplansky.
Yes. Okay, next up we have communications. I didn't see anything additional. Did we get anything after?
No additional communications.
Okay, then we'll move on to citizen comments. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak on a matter not on the agenda, this is your opportunity to do so. We're going to ask that you please use this sign-in sheet next to Mr. McLean. That's going to help us keep better minutes and also help facilitate any staff questions and answers that we can get to you. If you need to do that as part of your comment. As a reminder, the Planning Commission is not going to engage you in discussion, and we ask that when you come to the microphone, you please state your name and city of residence and try to keep your comments to 4 minutes or less. Is there anyone who would like to comment on something not on the agenda? No one? Okay, then we'll close citizen comments and move on to our first item, which is a site plan review, SP 0118 FSZ Holdings LLC on the east side of Coolidge between Franklin and Wiltshire is requesting site plan approval for a facade update in the downtown district. Mr. McLean, do you want to give us the staff report on that?
Sure. The applicant is seeking a site plan approval for a facade change. As you recall, some months ago, the Planning Commission and City Council approved a special land use for that property for a shared office concept. Applicants are before us for their facade change. So, conducted a review of the site plan. Saw no issues were indicated in the plan. I had Director Schuler from Public Works review for any issues with engineering. There were none. Fire Marshal Pete Kelly also took a look at the plans, saw no issues. The applicant, I believe, and their architect are here this evening for any questions that the Planning Commission may have for them.
Okay, would the applicant like to introduce themselves?
I think I'm the applicant of record, Ari Sartarian, representing FSC Holdings.
Could you make sure you're using the microphone?
And my business partners are here, Aaron Friedman and Daniel Stockieve, and my architect Grant Jeffries is here as well. So please feel free to ask us any questions you have.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment on this item? No? Okay, then I'll open it up to the commission. Who would like to start?
I'll go first.
Okay.
So your wall pack lights, are they shielded?
Grant, would you mind addressing these questions?
Yeah, they would be the style that the it directs the light mostly downward.
Down, okay, all right.
Just mostly to light the.
Because
those
I
rear
don't
entry
think we
doors.
saw a cut sheet in our packet. That's why I was asking.
Okay.
And then the other item I really had was on the front facade. Because your property line is right to the front of the building, how much is the new facade extending into the right-of-way, or is it at all? Or do you know from your survey that you're set back a little bit from the property line?
I think we're right up against the property line.
Okay.
So the cedar facade that we want to put will only stick 2 or 3 inches from the face of the current brick
Okay.
or stone, and then there is an awning over the front door that we currently show then wrapping down and having a vertical element. That sticks out, I think 24 inches is what we're proposing. We could easily eliminate the vertical element of that awning so that it doesn't extend into the right-of-way at all.
Yeah, that, you might need to do that.
Okay.
All right.
That's my question.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
That was all I really had.
Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Talking about the awning, I have that concern as well on the vertical element, I mean, extending to 24 inches. And then I have a question, Tim, and I don't know if we know this. The awning comes out, it's 24 inches with the horizontal as well. And that, what distance above the sidewalk is that?
That is 8 feet above the sidewalk to the underside
Does
of
that
the
meet our
awning.
requirements? Do we know?
I believe it does. I can get confirmation on that.
Okay.
I think that's consistent with most awnings over front doors that we have along our downtown district and along the Coolidge district. So I think that's an adequate height. We don't want it like 10 feet high. That makes it kind of look a little out of scale, I think, for that door, because they're not going to replace the front door, correct? They're using existing doors?
No, it actually, the new location of the front door currently is a window. So we
Oh,
are.
okay.
Yeah, you're moving the front door.
But you're not raising the height of the door in comparison
No.
to the existing door, okay.
No, basically we're taking a set of windows, removing, the facade that's underneath to get it to the ground level and putting a
Okay.
door, just to be more central and
Sure.
for the overall layout of the interior.
Go ahead.
Oh, and is the vertical sheeting to the left, is that where the door was formerly located?
Yeah, currently that little area, there's like 2 doors actually, because I think at one time it was split into 2 suites. So they're kind of angled in. One door goes this way and one that way, so we're just kind of removing those storefront doors and infilling that with a panel that's flush with the rest of the facade.
You don't happen to have a color rendering, do you? I certainly could have appreciated a rendering illustrating the colors that you're talking about in the site plan. There.
Yeah, so the plan is to paint the existing brick and stone that's there now white, and then I actually brought a sample in case you guys haven't seen this before. This is, it's called shoshugiban. It's a Japanese technique where they actually char the wood and it helps preserve it, and then you seal it as well. It's like an ancient technique that they used to preserve wood before they had other techniques. So the wood, you can still see the grain, and actually it will tends to lighten up once it gets weathered and sun on it. But
Is the charring for aesthetic purposes, or does it actually preserve the?
it does help
Both.
preserve the wood as well.
That's
Yeah.
both.
I have a couple questions. Okay. So my question is actually to Ms. Shadle and to Mr. Murad. So is your objection to the vertical, I guess, whatever
The
you're-
awning.
the awning, the vertical awning, is it because it is permanent and goes out into the sidewalk? Because we have, a lot of the businesses along Coolidge have like flower pots and little sandwich boards and little other accoutrement. There's a mini library out in front of one of them that sticks out like, 12 to 18 inches. So I'm not sure it will be like an impediment to people on the sidewalk, but is I don't know if your objection is because it's permanent and can't be removed.
That's more of it, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And maybe a 6-inch depth might be something,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily going to
12.
match the horizontal on it, but I understand what you're trying to do there, I think visually, but so maybe reducing it to like a 6-inch depth or something, if that's.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't
Yeah,
stick out any
we
further
were
than
just
gas.
discussing it with Daniel before coming up here, and he said he would be okay either eliminating it or we could explore an option like that. Looking at the plan, it looks like, so there is a fairly large tree kind of in that general area of the sidewalk, and it looks like we would have 5'3" between where the concrete stops because there's mulch around the tree and where that 24-inch protrusion would occur. So 5'3", but if we cut it back a little bit, then we would have over 6 feet.
So to go back to Mr. Richardson's question, the majority of the facade is going to be this wood material, correct? With black accents and a very small area of orange, is that correct?
Yeah, so on the far left side on the elevation, which is the north side, there is part of their logo is an eye, and then the top part is a little orange triangle. So we wanted to kind of mirror that with that detail on that side. So that would be like a piece of perforated black steel applied, only an 1/8 of an inch or so thick, applied on top of the cedar, and then the triangle at
I
the
like
top
it.
would be orange to mirror the logo.
And the windows, are those going to be transparent, all of the doors and windows?
Yeah, with the possible exception of the windows on the right side, that's a meeting room. So we were considering possibly frosting that glass up to a certain point just for some privacy, so people on the sidewalk, but
So
it would be
appear-
letting light
It would
in.
appear like white then?
Yeah.
Would you consider, instead of doing a white frosted look, something more like a shading, something similar to the business that's a little bit farther down where the windows are just darkened as opposed to completely frosted? I just feel like they would really stick out against that dark siding.
Yeah.
The rest of the commission can weigh in as well, but anyone else?
I gotta go back to your questions about lighting. Your exterior wall packs, they look like a basic wall pack, but looking online, they're almost like an adjustable floodlight. Who's to say they can't just take those and point them right back at the people living behind there? It's just a very, very basic floodlight, based
Okay.
on your specifications.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely change that, but basically the intent of those lights is just to light the door, so someone accessing the building during either early in the morning when it's still dark out or after hours would be able to see and get into the building. Our intention is definitely not to light the alley behind it.
Also, looking at the photometrics of it, I mean, you are really, really low in a lot of the alleyway, and I don't know what our requirements are for the alleyway, but you get behind that garage, there is zero light.
Mr. McLean, I don't believe we have any minimum lighting requirements, correct?
None that I am aware of for alleyways.
I've never heard of any. So,
And then there's a wall, isn't there a wall? How does that go out? How does that exit there?
So are
This
you
thing is
comfortable then with the
attached
amount of
to-
light that's
No, no, I
back
know
there
the
for
garage
use
is.
by
I'm
your
just trying to-
customers?
There's a wall or something.
I mean, you got
Yeah, I think
0.2
we have
foot candles
the
in a lot of
parking
areas.
spaces
Here it is.
themselves pretty sufficiently lit, and there might be a street light back in the alley that we didn't account for in the photometric plan that sort of lights that alley a little bit.
This isn't gonna bother anybody.
I mean, looking at it, you're
Like, this is all like grass.
hard to read, like
trees right
18
here.
lux, which is less than 1 foot candle. I mean, less than 0.1 foot candles.
This is
In the
all- this
alley.
is all-
Yes, and where the parking lot is. That's a very, very low amount of light in those alleyways. I almost think you need a little bit more light back there just for safety purposes.
Okay.
Or you're gonna have somebody sleeping between your garage and the building. So, also, are those light fixtures, are they gonna be backed up by any kind of emergency power or battery backup?
Yeah, we can do that.
Because looking at the photometrics again, I think emergency lighting on the alley and the exit ways, you're required to have at least 1 foot candle at the exit, which you probably have that, but once you get beyond the stoop, you're not required to have it anymore. So you need to make sure you have a little bit of emergency lighting outside the doors.
Okay.
All set, Mr. Trotter?
You could probably get that right off your exit signs if you needed it. Right. Has that ever, the cedar siding, has it ever been like put to test on how sidewalk would be salted and all the salt beating on that would, how it would hold up against that? I mean, I love the
Anyway,
look
my
of it.
porch
I'm just
does.
concerned how it's going to look after the first winter of the beating from salt.
Honestly, I'm not sure.
I mean, I have a cedar porch, and I salt the steps on it all the time, and it does not, it's no worse for wear. It doesn't stain it. Just weathers like normal. You can't tell it from the rest of the porch, but it doesn't get salted.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I have one more
Yes.
question. Can you just explain the purpose or what you intend to do with the area that you're enclosing with the wood fence there between the structure and the garage?
Yeah, that's intended to be like a outdoor patio space for the tenants of the building that they could use on days when it was warm enough to go sit outside, either while they're eating lunch or, you know, for client meetings, or there'd be some kind of tables and chairs back there.
Anyone else?
Is that a vacated alley?
Is between the garage and here.
Ms. Chairman.
Yes.
No, my questions were answered. My only real question on this project was
Right here, okay.
about shielding the fixtures in the back, and I believe that was covered already from hearing from the conversation as I walked in.
Okay.
I have no other real issues with this,
It's here.
with this facade.
I would talk about here, but I think you might be right.
Yeah,
If there's no other comments or questions, would anyone care to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion. Hang on.
To create an enclosed patio.
Get back here. So this is site plan SP 0118. I make a motion to approve with the following condition: the wall light packs are shielded, only light down, and that the
Vertical.
vertical piece of the awning be removed. Or if they can have it not projecting 24 inches out into the sidewalk.
So reduced or removed?
Reduced or removed, yeah. That's the black vertical piece, it's an awning, projects out 24 inches into the sidewalk.
It's right there.
Can I amend one thing about your cutoffs or light fixtures? That they're not adjustable like these.
That's fine, yeah.
Is there a second?
I support.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Murad, a second by Ms. Buckler. Any other discussion or comments?
Is there a maximum we want the vertical to be if they decide to leave it? 12 inches, 6 inches?
I think 12 would be fine in that area.
Are you talking about projecting out over the sidewalk?
Yeah.
Is it over the right-of-way?
Not over,
Onto the right-of-way?
Mm-hmm,
onto the right way.
yeah,
No,
no,
I would say none.
yeah,
Reduce it to 0.
yeah.
Don't want to protrude into the right-of-way at grade, no.
Right.
So then that would be amended to be vertical
Vertical.
awning removed.
Moved, yeah. Mhm.
Any other comments or amendments? No? Okay. Do you want to call the roll?
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Frotto.
Yes.
Buckler.
Yes.
Kempner.
Yes.
Murad.
Yes.
And Kaplansky.
Yes. All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
You're
you.
all set.
Good luck.
Okay, our next item of business is a continued discussion on the amendment for accessory buildings and structures. Mr. McLean, you want to introduce that?
From our July meeting, I'd incorporated some changes that were suggested into the the draft ordinance, there was a considerable discussion about decibel standards, and there also seemed to be some opposition to allowing the placement of generators or AC units in a side yard. So I guess what I'm hoping to get tonight is some feedback as to, is this something we want to continue to pursue? I mean, I know there's been issues with generators in side yards. As I indicated in the report, the Zoning Board of Appeals has heard 4 cases in the last 2 years addressing just generators in the side yard.
Okay. So this is an item for discussion, so we will take public comment on it, but I'd like to reserve that to the end, and we'll make sure that that gets in as part of the record, and any future amendments to this particular item. But right now, does anyone in the commission want to start the discussion? Ms. Kempner?
I'm not the hugest fan of having a decibel level, because I think of the worst case scenario, 15 years down the line or whatever, the AC unit gets old, it starts getting loud, and it's an 80-year-old woman. Does the city then come in and say, you have to replace this? I think that's somewhat problematic. I think you either let them be in the side yards or you don't, and you recognize that sometimes things get louder with age. But I think that starts to get very clumsy and very burdensome on the city to have to go and try and measure decibels. And if we were going to put it in the side, I'd rather see more like 5 than 3 feet.
So does that mean you would be okay with a side yard as long as it had an increased setback?
I would be okay with a side yard if it had an increased setback.
Anything else right now?
That's it for me.
Ms. Kapelinski? The section setback, exterior appliances shall adhere to the following minimum setbacks from abutting property lines. A residence other than single-family detached, 2 feet. I don't think that's enough. I don't think our multi-residential properties should be treated any different than our single-family properties, residence or residence. However, I do agree with a decibel level, and I don't think it matters who has it because it's a burden on the neighbors, and maintenance should be, they should maintain the device regardless of who owns it. This is part of owning a property, and I like the idea of a decibel because I think they're very loud, and I hear them, and like Tim, I like to sleep with my windows open, and air conditioners and generators and all of these things in particular, when we're using the generators, almost everybody's windows are going to be open because I don't think it's going to run the central air conditioning
No,
system.
well, I think a whole house
Big one.
a big
Sure.
one, and that's what we're
Sure.
talking about here, is
Yeah,
big
big
ones. We're
one.
not talking about portable ones. Big ones
Yeah.
are going to be running the whole house, and whoever's...
It's going to be really loud.
But they're going to be quieter than the portable
small ones.
generators.
Sure, well, I
Thank you.
think I was called draconian, and I said this before when I suggested we include the portables in here too, because those are very loud. But I think a noise ordinance is required. We have so much noise now between blowers and mowers and air conditioners and yada yada. So I think something like that is required, and then we address it every 5 years as technology changes, because they may dampen and over time and go down, and I like the idea of having one.
Would that be better addressed in a noise ordinance, like a specific noise ordinance, as opposed to
So a lot
parceling it
a
out?
lot of communities would have a noise ordinance where they might assign a decibel level at the property line.
So-
for
We have
during the
that.
day and for during the night. I looked in the code and I couldn't find anything that
No, neither
referenced
could I.
decibels.
And-
I saw a section on noise.
And actually, looking at the wording here, general decibel level for an exterior appliance placed in the rear yard. We're not talking about side yard here,
Well, there's one for a side yard too, isn't there? It's just a slightly
Yeah.
lower.
is it?
Well,
We
that's
had
a
talked about-
exterior
Oh,
appliances
inside
required
of
was a
the-
noise-reducing enclosure.
Right. That's
That
to put an enclosure around it.
So that could be a 100 decibel unit.
Right.
That we put an enclosure on it, it could still end up at 80.
Yep.
So I think we have to address the side yards at a specific decibel level. And I think we should start it here. We can go back to the noise ordinance, which I've wanted to introduce for a long time, many years. That gets a little complicated.
You can't sleep at night because of the noise? You
Well,
dream
no,
that
it's like 8 o'clock on Saturday night, someone's out there with their blower or mower. I mean, those are all different issues.
I think that is against ordinance.
It is, but I'm not sure if it is specifically, but I think if
It
it was
is.
more clearly spelled out, it would be better.
It's 7 a.m. to,
Again, my draconian nature wants it quiet. So I think it's good to have something specified, because these are going to be controversial, particularly like you, or I think it was somebody who talked about the neighbors put one in, the previous neighbors had signed off on something, and now the new neighbors are stuck with something, and that
Right.
is, and you may not notice it when you buy your house, that there's this whole house generator, if there's a fence particularly
Right.
between you and your neighbor's house. You don't go in the backyard of your neighbor when you're buying your house, so. I'm done.
Who's next? Mr. Richardson?
As always. First of all, from a practical point of view or a feasibility point of view, can we implement an ordinance that distinguishes between decibels for a side yard generator and decibels from a rear yard generator? You know, we're allowing more noise from the rear yard than the side yard, but can that really be policed? Really? I mean, I'm not. I guess I'm not picturing how that would actually work.
well,
Bring
I
one
think,
unit at a time.
I think the way this is, the purpose of this is when they're installing it, so that the specifications of the generator says that it's going to be this many decibels.
Those specs get down to like 5 decibels?
I don't know enough about
On the
generators,
market,
air conditioner units.
I don't know, it just doesn't, on a gut level, it doesn't seem, it seems problematic on a gut level, I'll say that. Okay, so, I'm struggling to remember my next point. I also agree with Ms. Buckler that I don't think there should be any distinctions between the type of residence that abuts the generator as far as setbacks go. I think the setback should be consistent. Now, I assume, but correct me if I'm wrong, if a person fails to get written permission from the neighbor to install a side yard generator, that person would still be able to go before the ZBA for a variance.
Yes.
Okay. In other words, give me this without the neighbor's permission. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute. What is the argument against relying on the current system of just directing people that want a side yard generator to go get a variance? What is the drawbacks of that from the city's point of view?
Well, in the last few years, we've seen a larger volume of mechanical permit requests for the installation of generators. It's been a very popular item. You know, there's been 4 cases, you know, just in the last 2 years for side yards, but we get requests in the rear yard, you know, pretty regularly. And currently, the ordinance for accessory structures doesn't have a comparable for, you know, generators or AC units in there. And
Do they have to get a variance for a rear yard now?
not for a rear yard, no.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm driving at is that, from my perspective, there may be situations when somebody has to put their generator on the side yard. I don't deny that. But I would think that as a city, we'd want to keep those kind of situations to a minimum, and maybe the best way is to rely on the current system. People don't need to get a variance to get a rear yard generator, and certainly the existing ordinance, I think, as you point out, needs improvements. I'm not suggesting that we can't do something with this. I just, with respect to side yard, though, I'm inclined to want to keep those kind of situations to a minimum, and I'm just wondering what the best way to do that is, and it occurs to me maybe ZBA is is the mechanism that we should continue to rely on. So those are my thoughts on that.
That got me to think, what if it was a fairly large side yard setback? So, yes, you could put it, but you'd have to have a lot of room between you and the next door neighbor. So not 3 feet, but, you know, something much more significant, 6 feet or something.
I think that's the better way to go, because there are sections in the city where there's more than 15 feet between houses. In the areas where there's 15 feet, that's where, to me, it's an issue, even for air conditioners. But
Right.
there are some areas in the community that there's much more space between the homes, that in those instances, yes, you could potentially put the generator in your side yard. Because if you look at the setback requirements, it could work.
Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a good idea to have an ordinance for exterior appliances. I understand what we're trying to do here. I'm still relatively generally against side yard appliances. Just came up about larger properties. We allow 75, 80-foot and 100-foot properties. There I can see it happening depending on the distance to the house or the distance of the appliance to the neighboring house. But it's a real problem in the vast majority of our lots that are 40, 50 feet wide, and I'm just generally against that. I don't think 2 feet from here to here, I mean, that's nothing. It's not going to resolve any sound issues. Plus, you're getting the sound bouncing off the building, whether the building, if it's brick or not, that amplifies it and projects it back towards the house. So, as I said, I'm generally against them in the small lots. Large lots, depending on where the buildings are, the two neighboring properties, the two neighboring structures, I could see that happening. I think we should define what they are, but I don't disagree that the mechanism, the ZBA, is the mechanism. Take them as they come. A lot of these situations are unique.
Madam Chair, just to respond to Commissioner Smith, are you talking just generators, or are you talking all exterior appliances?
Appliances, general, yeah. I think it's good that we I think it's good that we have an ordinance, either a separate ordinance or in another ordinance, about exterior appliances. I don't know if most people have air conditioners, but you know, someone installs an air conditioner, yeah, it works fine for a while, and 15 years later it isn't working. That's up to the owner to resolve it. You know, if they're elderly, if they're on a tight budget, they put it in. It's up to them, like any other part of their house or property, to keep it in operating shape. So. But I think it's good to have this defined in some manner, or it's separate ordinance. But let's keep the mechanism for variances with the ZBA.
Well, and currently with air conditioning units, those had been treated differently in that currently the city's had a long-standing policy, that was never addressed by ordinance, but with air conditioning units, they've been generally permitted in a side yard as long as the neighbor signs off on it. So I think that's kind of stresses the importance of why we need an exterior appliance ordinance, because really these things aren't accessory structures. And I think they
Right,
need to be
exactly.
defined differently.
Exactly. And quite honestly, if a neighbor writes a letter in support of a neighbor who wants it, that goes a long way with the ZBA. And if new people move in, it was there when you moved in.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, but
it's
I
not
know
perfect.
in my case, it's even been replaced once. So,
Well-
you know, they should have had to go through the same process again, and they didn't. They just,
We've got the same thing, new build. It's on
Yeah.
the side yard.
yeah.
Was never approached.
Yeah.
Well, luckily in a 40-foot lot, there's no room to put one in a side yard.
People still do it.
People still do it, and that's the problem.
Space in my lot.
I guess it's my turn to chime in on this. Looking at the ordinance for 60 dB at 15 feet on the side yard, just going through the specs from Kohler and Generac, at 23 feet, you're at 64. So if you're at 15 feet and it's only running at basically 50% load, you're already over the requirements for 60 dB. So from that position, I don't think you're gonna be able to find a generator that'll fit there. You'll find an AC unit that'll fall into that dB area, but as for a generator, that's not gonna fly.
Fine.
And that's at 23 feet, you're hitting 65 dB. Kohler wouldn't give you a distance, it just says 65 dB.
And that's at, what was the 65 at for Kohler? It
That's
doesn't
at
have-
23 feet, and that's at
23 feet.
50% basically capacity of the generator. The more load you have on the generator, the louder it gets. So when you're running at 100% load, it's probably gonna be about 75 or 80, and they don't give you that in certain times. But don't forget, you're also at 23 feet. So you're not gonna have the sound attenuating enclosure that's necessary to hit the 60 dB on a side wells. So, I mean, yeah, I agree, the zoning board should be the one to agree to it based on the circumstance. If you have a, 100-foot wide lot and there's nobody 30 feet around you, then you should have a problem. But I don't think it's something that should be addressed right here.
There's no additional
It's-
enclosure that would reduce that noise that could be used.
What
You could.
Isn't? So why couldn't you have an enclosure that reduces the noise?
You could.
You could.
Well, you could have an enclosure that reduces the noise,
It's
yes.
required in here.
Right.
If you look at the third
Yeah, it
third
talks
to the
about-
last sentence,
But a
in
standard
green, it
enclosure
says an
like
exterior premises will be required to be placed in a noise-reducing enclosure that does not restrict ventilation.
A standard enclosure provided from Generac, Kohler, Cummins, those are the ones that I'm looking at for what they provided. That would be somebody just taking it, literally put it down in their yard, not building a structure around it to reduce the noise levels. And in which case, then you have to build a structure and you'll be sitting here trying to figure out how to get that to fit within your lot lines most of the time.
Okay, so it's just saying that this will be placed in a noise-reducing enclosure.
Most generators that are being put in a permanent installation are coming in a noise-reducing enclosure.
Oh, so they come in one?
Yeah, they come
Not
in, it's a
be- okay.
standard package, they bring them in, they set them down on a pad, and they're built
Okay.
to have 65 dB out of them at 23 feet. They do not make a second level for a residential scenario where they're less than 65 dB.
Just a little fence area around it would be nice.
Well, then you're adding probably you're right at your lot lines a lot of times, especially in our community. Again, it falls into the zoning board having to take a look at the situation. If you have a 30-foot sidewall, you have room, you can do it. You can build a fence or enclosure around it.
So if, to play devil's advocate a bit on this zoning board of appeals variance, if I'm not mistaken, the ZBA is looking at a property and trying to define a hardship. So someone having a wider lot, I'm struggling with how they would use that and define that as a hardship. If we send them to the ZBA, I understand the logic of saying you have a
So-
wide lot, so you therefore have enough room to do it, but that I don't think constitutes
Well-
the standard of a hardship.
If I might say something, I was under the impression that people are requesting side yard placement because they do have a hardship. There's some reason they can't put it in the backyard.
Is that, what,
They
the
don't want it in
generators
the
that have come before the
Oh,
ZBA
that's
so far?
not good enough.
What is then their hardship that they've identified?
The most recent case, the resident asked to put it in the side yard because of flooding issues in the rear yard.
Okay.
Okay.
And, the ZBA did determine in that case that a hardship existed.
That makes sense, yeah. My concern is just that with someone that does have a very unusually large, wide lot for this, it might make sense, like you were saying, to have that generator be in the side yard. Maybe they have a large enough space between them and their neighbors, but I don't think the ZBA could grant that approval, because I don't think that would be considered a hardship.
And there's additional
Could raise
standards
it.
they look at beyond just hardship, but that's the primary thing they focus on in granting variances.
Yeah, and if you're dealing with somebody with a 40-foot lot, your setbacks are usually 5 feet on one side, 10 feet on the other for your driveway. So you're going to want to put this in the 5-foot side. And based on just our setbacks of 3 feet,
don't have
you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I don't have that space.
Hold on.
So the dB doesn't even come into account, at least for a generator. An air conditioner is much smaller. Because what's the average size of a generator?
I'm looking at it right now to find the length and width.
Generator,
It's
24 by 24, 28 by
I'm looking
28.
at 48 inches long by
Greater.
25 inches wide, so you're just
Right.
over 2 feet.
Yeah.
You're 1 inch over.
Right, and
So
it's
you would
got
have
to
to be
be a
6
certain
inches off
distance.
the house at least
Right.
minimum, or a foot off the house probably.
So based on the 3 feet, they couldn't do it
Mhm.
in a 5-foot yard. side yard. Now, an 8-foot, 7, 8-foot, yeah, they could do it.
And for comparison with accessory structures, say if somebody wanted to put a garage, they can do it 18 inches from the lot line if they have firewall.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair, I have
Yes.
another question now that we're talking about. I agree that there should be a decibel level, a noise level within this. But,
Yeah.
based on what we just heard, now I'm questioning the 65 decibels from the rear yard at 15 feet. If you're going to get 65 at 23 feet, it's going to be louder at 15 feet. So you're not going to even meet the requirement to install one in the rear yard.
That can be changed.
That's exactly
but-
what I'm saying.
But I still think the line 2 with affecting neighbor property signs and exterior appliance exemption form should be stricken from it.
Madam Chair, I'm not so concerned about what the equipment can do. I think the concern should be the effect on the neighboring property. So the decibel level at the, at the point should be the driver. And, I mean, I don't know if there's better generators out there. I don't know if that's the cream of the crop that you looked at, Matt, Mr. Trotto.
The two basic ones that are
Yeah.
the ones that I would see installed on a regular basis.
So, I mean, it might be that they have to go to the next, model up to meet this ordinance. So they're buying a Cadillac instead of a Chevy. I don't know, but I think this is a noise level that I could live with at those distances. Because it does not stop. Like an air conditioner at least cycles. A generator is not going to stop for possibly 2-3 days. Or more. God forbid. We're pretty lucky in Berkeley, but.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, then, do we need to also specify that the noise-reducing enclosure is allowed in the rear yard as well? I mean,
I think that's a good
maybe we
point.
need to specify that.
So, right now it talks about the noise-reducing enclosure for only the side yards, and it basically, the way that I'm reading it is saying it's required. I would contend that they have to meet the required decibels, and if that requires a noise-reducing enclosure, then so be it.
Absolutely.
If they can meet those for if there's some special generator out there that doesn't require it, then that's fine. Personally, I would be in favor of taking out the noise-reducing enclosure reference, with the understanding that they have to meet the decibels specified, and that may or may not require a noise-reducing enclosure. Does that make sense?
It does. I just wouldn't want that to be interpreted as that you could not add the enclosure to.
So perhaps something gets added where it talks about exterior, noise-reducing enclosures may be utilized for exterior appliances that do not meet the maximum decibels at the specified locations or something. It could be
In order to
listed as
bring
an
it into-
option, but not a requirement.
Exactly. That's exactly right. An option just to meet the decibel requirement.
Anyone else?
Is it possible for a generator to run at that decibel? I mean, like, are we creating an ordinance that's impossible for anybody to comply with?
Everything's
I
possible.
think so. From a generator perspective, yes, but we're not doing it just based on a generator perspective. We're doing it based on AC or any other exterior appliance. As for a generator and a sidewall, you'll never hit 60 dB. It's not physically possible.
So looking here, I'm saying for AC units, most are below 60.
I've been looking up AC units. So.
Yeah, I'm just looking at
Okay.
AC units.
And is that below 60 when you're standing right next to it, or when you're at some
It's
range?
just saying it's, they say the quietest ones are between 50 and 60 dB.
Anyone else? Yes.
Maybe I'm in a unique situation, but I would prefer my neighbor's generator to stay in their air conditioner to stay in the side yard and not be moved to the back. My bedrooms are in the back of my house, so if I have my window open, my bedrooms are facing the opposite way. I would hear it more in the back than next to my house, where the bathroom is in my house on my two-story. So I might be the oddball out, but I would prefer it in my side yard, not in the back where I have a deck to, I would have to hear it even more so back there, that's all. Some residents, I
Again,
think-
one of the things you're missing is when it's in the side yard, as Commissioner Smith pointed out, and I know in my situation, it is the fact, the sound vibrates off, or
Yeah.
reflects off the
Sure, I
sides
can
of it.
appreciate that, but just,
It's going to be louder.
I don't,
It gets
my house
louder.
kind of blocks it, if you will, from my deck and my bedrooms, because I don't have windows
Right.
on that side, except for a bathroom.
Most houses in Berkeley do have windows on all four sides. A lot of the newer ones don't. It may be your case, or especially in your bedrooms. But the vast majority, and
Sure.
I'd say all of the older homes do have windows on all four sides.
Right.
So that's the situation.
Yeah, and I have one bedroom on that side of the house, but
So, and Madam Chair, I think one of the other things that we have to note is, well, air conditioners will run during, times of the year where, for comfort. Generators will have to run weekly, I think, for testing.
right.
So while we do have hours of operation between 9 and 6 p.m., new mothers out there may not appreciate it firing up at 1 p.m. during nap time.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know how long those tests take?
I think they're 15 minutes or
10 or
something.
15
like
not-
that.
not
15
very
minutes,
long.
depending on the model.
Seems like a really long time when you're waking up.
I mean, it's just going to be a really loud, it's going to be a loud noise that goes up, so it'll be like, somebody out there mowing or blowing or whatever, but it's still something that happens weekly and just something to be mindful of.
In the most recent case the ZBA heard, I believe the test goes for like 5 to 10 minutes, and I understand this particular generator was very quiet.
That's fine. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there that it's not just during times of power outage.
Well, when it's tested, it's not tested at full capacity, is it?
I have no idea. I mean, we test ours in the facility at full capacity because the idea is that
Right.
they will run our critical systems.
Worst case scenarios.
We run ours for an hour a month.
Anyone else?
Even looking online at most air conditioning units, they're all ranging between like 65 and 70 dB, but they don't give you an actual range of how far away they are. So I actually think that this, you are creating a scenario where you're not going to be able to physically be able to do it if you're based on 60 dB at 15 feet. You're
Right,
not
we might
going-
have to adjust that
We may have to
number.
adjust that number to something that's more logical. But I will say that the other thing is looking at how people are sizing these generators and what they provide. Most of the time, you're only using 10% of the load of the generator, so you're only running at about 10%. I mean, I can even tell you, looking at my own house, looking at what DTE provides, I got a 2.5 amp service in my house, I draw 4 amps. 90% of the time, I draw 4 amps, even when my air conditioning is running. So what you're actually using and what you're sized on based on AC and what they use to size these generators, you really don't load them up to 100%, especially on a residential house. Commercially, on commercial projects, that's a whole different story. But you're not going to run these things at 100%.
Okay, anyone else want to chime in on this one, or we're all set? All right, just briefly, I'll go through my comments. I'm fine with appliances in the side yard. I do especially like that we're creating a new ordinance for this, because I really don't think that they fit well under accessory structures. I would be interested to have some information prepared for when this comes back to us about what the decibel level measurements are typically for these units at 15 feet, just so we can confirm that we're not creating a situation where we're making something impossible to meet. I would agree with Ms. Kempner. I liked the 5 feet instead of the 2 and 3 feet that was designated for near residential properties. I mentioned already the noise reducing enclosures I think are a good option, but shouldn't necessarily be a requirement. And provided the decibel levels match up with the typical decibel levels of the units that exist, I'm fine with the levels that are currently proposed. If no one else has any comments, does that give you enough direction, Tim, on what you need?
It does, yes. I can make revisions and I can send it out to everybody, you know, as soon as I do it, just to kind of get a consensus before we bring it back.
Well, I have one additional question. I'm a little unclear on this issue of enclosures. I heard that they're sold with enclosures.
Most residential.
Generators are.
Sorry, yes.
That's what I'm talking about, generators. And the enclosures referenced in this draft,
I think
they
that-
mean those
I think that
those
would
kind?
be in addition to what would
In
come with the
addition, okay.
standard model.
If then we're talking about a requirement for additional enclosures, I'd like some information on what that would be. Wood, metal, or what, you know, what kind of enclosure? And how big it might, I think we can figure out how big it would be, but
I mean,
I'd like
when
to
you run
know.
into that situation, you run into all kinds of different problems. You know, the clearances that are required by code, accessibility into the enclosures, how are you gonna get to it? You gotta get in there and maintain these, this equipment. So in a generator scenario, you gotta get in and change oil once in a while. You gotta go in
Right,
there and do some
once a
work on it,
year,
or if
yeah.
something goes wrong with it, they gotta get in there and tear it apart and fix the alternator or something. They're unique clearances. So
Mhm.
it'd have to be something rather creative and look somewhat architecturally pleasing, I would say. I don't know how you would be able to do that with this
Well,
kind of.
I'm not saying, you know, I know what the answer is. I'd just like some information to enable me to understand what that might entail.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this item? No? Okay. Then we will move on to the last item on the agenda. That was the public participation plan. Again, I'd like to collect comments from the commission and then collect public comments at the end of the discussion item. Mr. McLean, did you want to give us a rundown of what we have in front of us?
Sure. I have just a rough draft of a public participation plan. What factored in probably the most in this draft is the standard that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation has used for best practices, you know, for public participation. I've looked at a lot of communities that are RRC certified and kind of used their plans as kind of a template to get started.
Okay. Who would like to open discussion on this item? Ms. Kavlansky.
So I like the draft. There's some areas that I think are a little bit too specific for my personal taste, but overall, I think it's a nice blueprint for the goals that it's trying to achieve, which is, this is, you know, it's required by the redevelopment-ready communities. It does prompt both the city and our commission and city council to kind of go above and beyond. There are statutory requirements. It does spell out what those are. And sometimes, you know, that's all that there are resources for. It does touch on, I think this is a little colored by the last 2 years, but that's, I think, a good thing. But we also have to remember that not every project that comes up is a planned unit development in Berkeley. Some are private developments within the statutory or ordinance or zoning requirements, and the developer or the owner has rights to do what they want to do within the framework of what's allowed. And so that has to be a little bit reflected in here as well. Not everything is going to be an open dialogue on every project, but certainly there are projects that do require rezoning and planned unit development and will have some impact, downtown development requirements and or traffic or whatnot. So I think this takes a wide brush and colors all of those and touches them all. But it is a fluid blueprint. And that's what it needs to be. It can't be a checklist for everything because every situation is going to be different. So I do like that portion of it. There's some things I might make a little bit more generic, that give us the flexibility as a community to do what we need to do, and then satisfy, you know, the goals. So, that's it.
Okay. Yes, Mr.
Sure.
Richardson?
As a statement of principles, it's a great document. You know, I think it incorporates all the principles that we want to employ when it comes to public participation. Ms. Buckler mentioned a few specific situations which might differ from other situations, such as rezonings and PUDs. What I found myself wondering when I read through this was whether we need to, and I know this is intended to be fluid in an outline, but whether at some point we might want to formalize the timetable for public participation when we do have a PUD or rezoning. Yeah, there's a lot of language in here about the public should be involved early. I find myself wondering, how do you define early? What's early? You know, is that just the judgment of who? And, you know, I haven't thought a whole lot about the nuts and bolts of it, but, and I want to make clear too, I'm not talking about, when I say early in public involvement, I'm not talking about first-class mail to all surrounding property owners the minute the developer walks in the door. That's not necessarily, but short of that, we might want to think about, you know, memorializing or incorporating some specific steps, like we will put, you know, as soon as the developer announces intentions to come before the planning commission, we will put that on the city's website. We will put that on the Facebook page. Those are just ideas and suggestions. Those aren't concrete recommendations. But I'd be more comfortable with a little more definiteness when it comes to when the public is, you know, given notice. And I think that would assure the public, as well as it would put to rest a lot of our own uncertainties about that.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Tim, I think this is wonderful. I think you did a great job of bringing together a lot of what we've heard and stolen some of the best ideas out there and put them in here, as well as some that apply specific to our community that I hadn't seen elsewhere. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that. I think there's a couple things that I'd like to see added. I think we talk a lot about transparency and being open with the results of public participation. And I'm wondering if that shouldn't be included, maybe not as a separate goal on page 5, but maybe incorporated into one of the goals that you already have there. Just speaking about how we make the results of any kind of public participation more transparent. You know, how are we communicating that?
I think that's on page 6, under the Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of it more as a goal
Okay.
versus, you know, as a goal of what we're looking to do. There's a couple, I think, typos on 6 and 7 I can give you early, but I think that I'd also like to see, and maybe I missed it here, but city employees, public safety, DPW be included as stakeholders. And again, I know this is it's a working document, and I think that's exactly the way that we should use it as we attempt to refine it and apply it. Yeah, for the most part, I think those are. I mean, workshops is something we can talk about, whether we want to identify those separately from the other items that you have. I mean, they're different in my opinion, but it's my opinion than the other items that you have listed here. As far as how, you know, we interact with everyone.
What's that? Anyone else?
I have a comment. Last meeting, we had conversations about how the DDA would interact with the Planning Commission and their role and requirements regarding how they kind of handle things up to the Planning Commission levels. I'd kind of like to see some kind of verbiage in here that kind of directs what the Planning Commission does after the DDA does their review and their oversight.
Ms. Kempner?
I also think it's good. I mean, I think these are, you know, much of them contain very similar ideas, right? So we're just kind of tweaking them, and I like that. I would also like to see a little more defining in early to help repair the conflict or weird feelings, so that residents feel like, okay, I know I can expect, you know, to hear at this stage. And I would also like to see this be given to the city's engagement advisory board, just so that they can look and pass along any additional thoughts that they might have, since that's kind of supposed to be their wheelhouse.
All set?
Yes.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll go. So I had a few comments. I think this is a good start. I think we need to maybe rein it in some places and expand it in others. I want to make sure that we're not over-promising here. We have limited resources with staff and budgets and all those sorts of things. So it's wonderful to have the goals to involve the public and notify them as much as possible, but I just want to confirm that this is within our means to do so. I thought it would be good to add the Zoning Enabling Act under the statutory section. It talks about notice requirements for rezonings and text amendments and special land uses. So I think that'd be helpful to have those minimum requirements spelled out in there as well. I had a couple typos that I can just pass those on to you later, Tim, separately, but just a couple ideas on reorganization.
Planning enabling.
But my other major comment was kind of along the lines of what Mr. Richardson was saying. We have all these great things in here outlined as options for us to help involve the public, but I think it would be helpful to give people a clear picture of when we will use these different tools. For example, a run-of-the-mill facade site plan that we had in here this evening, we're not going to run a charrette on something like that. And while that's a pretty common sense example, you know, it might be helpful, I thought, maybe to divide things into different categories. So you might have a basic category that would include posting on a calendar on the city's website and maybe the required newspaper notifications, and that might be for the run-of-the-mill special land use that we get in or something like that. And then you could maybe move into something, either divide it into one up, or maybe have two additional categories. I was just kind of playing around with intermediate and advanced, but however you'd want to divide it. And maybe the next level notifications would involve social networking and some of these other focus groups and charrettes and those sorts of things. Obviously, the highest level of public engagement would be reserved for things like the master plan. So that would be where we'd get into our charrette. But we might not get into something like that, even on something like a PUD. Maybe that's more like the level of the community workshop, which I think the Redevelopment Ready Communities site had a good description of community workshops that I think would be helpful for something like that, but made it clear that they're not going to rise to the level of the charrette. Other than that, I mean, that was my few comments. Is there anyone else that wants to chime in? No?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Would it be helpful if we included the flow charts that Mr. McLean put together on the site plan and PUD process?
Yes.
Most recently, I think that sets the public's expectations for how things move, both from a regulatory, lack of a better term, standpoint. I mean, there is a requirement for how things move, and people, if they understand that, I think it's helpful.
And that might be an appropriate place to indicate where public comment or public involvement would start.
Yep, it could be put into this flow chart.
Right.
And it could even then identify your idea of the different levels where charrettes would be needed or things like that. It's a good idea.
Because it, and I said this, I think, the last time, but it's entirely plausible that an owner has a large enough piece of property that is zoned appropriately for what he wants to do, and it is a significant development. Now, it needs probably a lot of site plan review, but it doesn't need rezoning, it doesn't need variances, it doesn't need a PUD, but it is significant in size that he could bring it fully fleshed out and dropped on our doorstep. And he's entirely within his right to do so, and his only public comment is here during this, and we, except for our comments on things that we want to change and what's within our purview, pass it. But I mean, it could still be significant, and I mean, I think everybody, that's a unusual situation for a large one, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities. So I think people need to understand where that input can be done. And I think, work very hard to get that input along the way, but not everything's going to be La Salette.
And that's a good point. So something like a site plan might be listed in here as not really having any public involvement other than the comments that might appear at the commission.
I think we just had tonight.
That's a good point.
And I think the other plans, that might be the difference between some of them describe a low impact versus a high impact.
There were some of them
Right.
that talked about that, and I think I see value in doing that. My concern is if we were to, and maybe it doesn't happen as much here as in other communities, but if we were to have a project that we thought would be low impact and then did that minimal involvement, and it turned out to be something that was maybe more substantial than we had anticipated, I would hate to be put in a position or have the public think that we didn't reach out purposely. I think there's benefits in deterrence to both of those ways of looking at
One of the things I
things.
wanted to shy away from is one or two of the plans talked about trying to identify low controversial and high controversial development. And I've learned you can't do that.
Can't
because
do it.
I've
Right,
seen
that's what I would
projects that I thought
struggle
would
with.
be
Yeah.
easy approval in and
Yeah.
out of there, get very controversial and vice versa.
Right.
So I go back to my caution of any document like this is, there are statutory requirements that we must follow. There's ordinance and code and whatnot that we must follow. This is a blueprint, and what you put in it, though, is going to be received by the reader as gospel, for lack of a better term. So there needs to be that flexibility, because work still needs to get done. And there are limited resources to get work done. Not every project can have the same level of resources applied to it, and I think we need to make sure we set the expectations correctly, but that there are options and how those options will be played out, so. But I like it as a first start. And I think you're fairly long down the road. I don't think this is like a 10% document. I
No.
mean, I think this is like a 75 or 80% document, so.
Okay. Anyone from the public that wants to comment on this? No? Okay, so we'll look forward to the next draft then.
One more thing, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I do recall a discussion about controversial versus non-controversial development. I agree that rubric just doesn't work. But I would encourage Mr. McLean to look at maybe more objective criteria, number of square feet, percentage of lot coverage, number of stories. There might be some numbers out there that could be used as a criteria for more intensive public involvement. And I'd like to see some ideas along those lines, I guess.
All right, then we will move on to liaison reports. Does anyone have anything to report?
Well, yes, the Environmental Committee did meet. We have a couple of speakers lined up for our next two meetings. DPW Director Schuler, and then Ms. Carmody has agreed to speak to us in October. And that kind of aligns with the priorities of the committee, which basically involve addressing stormwater issues, addressing complete streets issues, and our other priority is energy efficiency. Along the lines of stormwater, we've decided to develop a kind of a user-friendly brochure or information sheet with practical steps for homeowners who wish to, accommodate their property to retain more stormwater or be more less impactful on the sewer system, and we're going to have that available pretty shortly. A lot of the information in that is very very standard, and we'll be able to pull it together fast and distribute it as a service to the homeowners of Berkley. So that's my report on our committee.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything to report?
I actually met with Vivian.
Okay.
I actually missed the DDA meeting, so I went out of my way to meet up with Vivian and have a quick discussion with her, and she's in her involvement with the community, with the DDA development. Really, there's nothing new really to report other than they're working on coming up with a master plan and a couple different ideas. But just wanted to point out that I've gone out of my way to actually meet with her on my own time. So.
Mr. Patterson, did you have something?
Parks and Rec met. They are doing a touch-a-truck again this year, September 15th. They're doing their senior outing, standard restaurant and a mystery trip. If anybody's interested, check out their website. And they are wrapping up their summer camp.
Okay. Council adopted the second readings of the outdoor auto sales ordinance that we looked at a few months ago, and they also have the ordinance about raising chickens approved. So I think there's a couple people doing that right now in the city. There was a presentation on the potential Coolidge Road Diet. So if anyone's interested, that's available to watch. And they also approved the first reading of the amendment we looked at allowing administrative approval of accessory structures. And that was all that council did? Yes. Mr.
Chamber, I was not able to attend the meeting, but I'm looking at their agenda notes, and the big things they had were the Cruise Fest and then the pub crawl last Thursday. So that meeting, next meeting is in a couple weeks, so I'll have more at the next one.
Ladies' night.
That, I think, is
Is that
DDA, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yes,
Madam Chair,
Mr. Anthony?
Councilmember Gavin couldn't be here this evening, and he's the council liaison to the ZBA. ZBA did not meet this month as there were no variance requests on the docket. The ZBA will meet in September. Again, there's no variance requests on the docket, but they discussed some amendments to their rules of procedure.
Okay, good to know. Right, should we go around? Anything to add tonight, Lisa?
Not really. It's almost back to school time, so everybody enjoy the last few days of summer, and hope you're enjoying your new position.
So far, so good. Matt?
Nothing much to add.
Nothing for
Anyone on
I'm
this
good.
side? Good?
Yes. I hope everyone has a happy and safe Labor Day. Please slow down, stop fully at all stop signs, especially in school zones, and I'm so glad Ms. Kapelansky's sitting there. You did a great job.
Congratulations to Ms. Kaplansky on ascending to the chair, and we'll try not to give you a hard time.
That'd be good.
I'd also like to thank you for taking the gavel. Sorry I was late. I had an issue in another community. They liked us this time, so I was able to make it here. But
Good.
again, thank you. Thank you for your services in the last year, Ms. Buckler, and onward.
Okay, with that, does anyone have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hour and 14 minutes.